Bright sun was shining through my window today when I rise. Time's come to wipe away the slumber from these tired eyes. I said, it's time for rest when the work is done. When night is falling, yes, there's time for fun. But when the sun hits your eyes in the morning, take a good meditation.
You will not just live as I sing.
When the sun hits your eyes, just take a meditation.
Hello and welcome to the Humanity Videocast for October 14th, 2018. I'm Tom Quine, and today I want to talk to you about morality and ethics, what's right and what's wrong, how can we tell what the basis of all morality is, and what kind of basic principles can we use to guide our behavior if we would like to become moral persons and good citizens of the world. Now, my presentation is going to be in two parts. The first part is going to be a critique of a book by Sam Harris called The Moral Landscape. Now, this book was published in 2010, and it is one of the very few books on the philosophy of morality that has made the New York Times bestseller list, and sales continue to be very good. And Sam Harris, since 2010, has not apparently changed his views. He has put out many hundreds of hours of podcasts, videocasts. He's had public lectures and so on. And in these media, he continues to put forth the same theory of morality. And for many of his millions of listeners and viewers, this may be the only experience to a formal philosophy of morality that they have exposure to. And so I think it's worthwhile to do a critique of this book, and I'll be going through that. I should say, first of all, I am a big fan of Sam Harris. I support his views on religion absolutely. I think he's dead on. But there's lots that I disagree with, especially around politics, but also around morality. And so I'm going to take a friendly look at the moral landscape to start off with. And then after that, in the second half, I'm going to put forth my own theory of morality, which I think is a good one, but I'm very interested in hearing what your opinion is. I've worked on this theory for 20 years. I think it's bulletproof, but please let me know. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Give me some comments at the end of it, and I will be very grateful for that. So, on with it. So let me start off by summarizing the moral landscape very briefly. There are two basic things that Sam is trying to say in this book. First being that religion is no longer valid or usable as a guide to moral behavior in the modern world. This is because most of the big religious texts, especially in the monotheistic religions, were written 2,000, 1,500 years ago or whatever, and they reflect their times that they were written in. They have no understanding of modern science, they have no understanding of the modern world, and as a result they really can't address things for us. And not to mention that they're full of a lot of astonishing nonsense that just will not fly. In the Bible, in the Quran, you will find all kinds of justifications for the oppression of women, for genocide, for slavery, and other things which are viewed today as crimes. And as well, you find a bunch of moral guidance that is really ridiculous, seen in the light of today's world. Just to give you an example, in Deuteronomy, it tells you that if your teenage son is lazy and misbehaves and is disrespectful to his parents, then really what you should do is take him to the village square and have the men of the village stone him to death. Well, I can tell you that as a father of 3 sons, I suspect that in the modern world, if these sorts of rules were followed, not a lot of young men would actually make it to adulthood. And for this reason and others, I think we need to abandon a lot of the moral guidance that we see in the old religious texts. So Sam Harris's other premise in this book is that what morality is really about is the well-being of conscious creatures. So the well-being of conscious creatures, this is a phrase that comes up again and again in the book, and it comes up again and again in his speeches and in his podcasts. And we're going to pick that one apart in a few minutes. But first, let me explain the meaning of the phrase, the moral landscape. What Sam says is that there are experiences, there are human experiences which really plumb the depths of misery and degradation. And these he calls the valleys and ravines of the moral landscape. And there are other places and other experiences where human well-being and self-actualization is maximized, and these he refers to as the peaks of the moral landscape. And so it is navigating the peaks and valleys of the moral landscape that is the business of morality, and only science can give us proper guidance on that journey. So let's take a closer look at this sentence, the well-being of conscious creatures. Why conscious creatures? Let's start with conscious creatures first of all. Now I think where Sam is coming from is that he is all about relieving suffering, which is a noble thing to stand for, and he believes that only conscious creatures experience suffering, and only conscious creatures are aware of the suffering of others, and so therefore it's all about conscious creatures. Now he's got a sentence in his book which reads as follows: I think we can say by reason alone that consciousness is the only intelligible domain of value. And furthermore, that only conscious creatures can appreciate value. Value is something that is attached and lives in consciousness and nowhere else. Well, I disagree with that. I think there are lots of unconscious creatures that have values. For example, plants, which I don't believe Sam considers to be conscious, value the sunshine because the sunshine is the source of their nourishment, and so they will move their leaves to maximize their exposure to sunlight because they value sunlight. You can go even lower. You can go down to one-celled organisms that are swimming in the muck in the pond, and they are searching out nourishment because they value nourishment, and they are seeking a hospitable environment because they value survival. So valuing goes down all the way to the very humblest of living creatures, but it goes even lower than that. I can give you an example of a molecule that has values. The molecule is called DNA. That is the genetic blueprint of all living creatures. And DNA has a very core central value, and that is to survive from one generation to the next. And so I think value is a part of the universe as a whole, not necessarily restricted to conscious creatures. It applies all the way down. So let me supplement this discussion with a rehearsal of an argument that Sam gives in one of the podcasts that he made with Joe Rogan, which intends to illustrate his point about conscious creatures. He says, let's just say, for example, that you're driving along in your car and a bug splats onto the windshield. Now you might say, oh, poor bug, but you might also say, damn it, can't these bugs watch where they're going so that I don't have to wash my windshield? And you don't feel a whole lot of moral responsibility for that bug. But if you were to run over a squirrel, you might say, poor little squirrel, I wish I'd seen it beforehand so that I could possibly have avoided running it over. I feel bad now. But if you had struck a dog, your level of moral concern would be raised, and you might want to stop and see whether the dog was all right, or if the dog had been killed, you might want to check its collar to see if you could contact the owner, and you would certainly feel some responsibility towards that dog. But if by accident you had struck a child, that would surely be a traumatic event for you that you may never recover from for the rest of your life. And Sam's point is that the higher the level of consciousness, the greater the sense of moral responsibility we feel. So he goes on to say, if you dropped your coffee cup and it smashed on the floor, you wouldn't feel guilty, you wouldn't feel a sense of moral responsibility, you wouldn't feel too bad about it, because it's not a real living creature. It has no consciousness of its own, it has no memories, it doesn't know what happened to it. And so his argument is that it's all about conscious creatures. Now, I can give you some examples where this does not hold. Very many people around the world attach moral value and moral worth and moral significance to items which are insensate and unconscious and have no memories, and they're just not living items. For example, most people around, or many people around the world, would feel very offended, would feel it to be an immoral thing to do, to desecrate the national flag. Many people, well, I think most of humanity would say it is immoral to desecrate a corpse. Now, a corpse is non-living. Even the corpse of a dog would be immoral to desecrate it, even though it has no consciousness and it doesn't live anymore. If you take, for example, many Christians and Muslims who would feel it a deeply immoral act to desecrate the holy book, the Quran or the Bible. Now, the Quran and the Bible have no consciousness of their own, but in particular, Muslims really deify the book of the Quran. They wash their hands before touching the book. They make sure that that book is on the highest shelf so that no other book should be above it. Would regard it as quite immoral to put the Quran on the floor. And yet the Quran is not a living thing, and it does not have any consciousness or any memory. And so what Sam is saying, that it's all about conscious creatures, morality is all about conscious creatures, that may be what he wishes it were, but it's not what it actually is. So to supplement this point, let me point out that when Sam says that morality is all about concern for the well-being of conscious creatures, he is not making a scientific argument. He is making what's called a normative argument. He is saying this is how it ought to be. It should be the case that we are concerned primarily with the well-being of conscious creatures. That's what moral behavior should be. It certainly isn't what moral behavior actually is in the real world. Now, if you were going to make a scientific argument about morality, you would start from saying, here's what morality actually is, and here's the evidence to prove that. You would not say, well, I wish morality were like this. You would say, no, morality is actually like that. Now, if you're trying to argue that human morality is primarily concerned with the well-being of other conscious creatures, I think that's just false on its face. I mean, look around you. Okay, so let's move on to talk about the concept of well-being. Now, I have a lot of trouble with this word, well-being. And one of the reasons why is because Sam never really adequately defines what is meant by well-being. Does it refer to, let's say, health, contentment, happiness, or is it like some just subjective feeling that you get? Well, now Sam refers to it as a brain state. Well-being is a brain state. Well, if it is a brain state, then it is a subjective feeling. And there's lots of problems with subjective feelings because being subjective, these feelings are unique to each individual. So what gives one person a feeling of well-being will not give another person a feeling of well-being. So for example, most people have a set point for happiness, contentment, and well-being, and their moods fluctuate above and below this set point. So they'll be happy 1 hour, they'll be unhappy the next, they will be happy for a week, and they'll be unhappy the following week. And that's just the way the human mind works. You might win the lottery, and you'll be deliriously happy for a couple of days, and then your relatives show up and ask you for money, and you sink down, and you just sort of hover back and forth above this, around this set point. And people have different set points. Some are happier than others, and some are sadder than others. But most people have a set point that they will return to. You might have some kind of a horrible accident. You lose your legs. You're very unhappy for a while. But over time, you will return to your set point. Your family will gather around you. You'll find a way to make a living, and you'll be all right. And you return to your set point. So there's only so much we can do to make a lasting impact on someone's subjective feelings of well-being. Obviously, if someone is in the depths of degradation and poverty and suffering, we can lift them out of that, and we can make a lasting difference to their feelings, their subjective feelings of well-being. But for most people, you're hovering around a set point, and whatever you do to improve their mood is going to last only a very short time. Now, Sam, as a Buddhist, or as a follower of, a student of Buddhism, should know that life is suffering, and you can't really avoid suffering over the course of your life. And furthermore, the mortality rate for human beings is running at 100% last time I checked, and so it all ends badly. It all ends badly in the end. So trying to really improve feelings of subjective well-being can get you into trouble pretty quickly. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is that people have different strategies and different methods for improving their own well-being. And some of these might involve harm to themselves and harm to others. So how are we supposed to make a moral judgment on other people's feelings of well-being, being that they are so subjective? You know, you might find somebody will eat themselves into obesity because they get a subjective feeling of well-being from constantly eating. You will find that people will do harm to others because it makes them feel good. They'll commit acts of violence. They'll commit acts of even murder. They will harm the people that they love the most because they feel that it will improve their well-being. You get psychopaths and sadists who will commit torture. You get masochists who will allow themselves to be made into slaves. You will have people who take drugs to make themselves feel better. They will become addicted to drugs. So are we supposed to be enabling these in the interests of serving the well-being of other conscious creatures? Now, if you take it even on a societal level, on a population level, you can take some societies in the past, but even today in the present, and you can improve the subjective feelings of well-being of a large segment of some societies by doing horribly immoral things, such as, let's say, killing all homosexuals, or killing all Jews, or confining women to the home, or if they go out, making sure that they're covered from head to toe so that no one can see even their eyes. Now, these are things which might improve the subjective well-being of a lot of people, but are they moral? And if they're not, then the argument that morality is all about the feelings of well-being of conscious creatures falls apart and doesn't hold water. Let's take something which is opposed to well-being, which I value greatly, and I'll explain why. And let's call it discontent. It's maybe not the exact opposite of well-being, but discontent is out there. And what happens with human beings is that they have a sense of well-being. They're living with their family as a young person, and they get discontented. They get a little tired of living at home, and they decide they want to strike it out on their own. So they go to school, and they're filled with great feelings of well-being, and they're studying for a new career and so on. And after a while, they get fed up with school and discontented with school and ready to get on with their lives. And so they go out and find themselves a really good job. And for a time, they feel good. They're earning some good money and they're contributing to society. And then after a while, they're tired of this job and they feel discontented. And this is the cycle of human existence. We feel discontented. We seek happiness. We find happiness. And then we get discontented again. And we seek further progress. And this is how human societies progress. This is how humans move through life and get from one stage to the next. And so we need to value discontent almost as much as we value well-being, because discontent is the path, is the motivator, it's the driver that leads us to seek well-being in the first place. Therefore, just to conclude, well-being is maybe a misconception when it comes to morality. And now I'd like to move on to my own theory of morality. It's going to be brief. Please hear me out. And again, tell me what you think. I'm really interested to know whether I'm on the right track or not. Now, Aristotle wrote 2,500 years ago or so, and there's a lot to admire in Aristotle, and I think he gave us an important concept in his concept of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is a Greek word, and what Aristotle said was that the purpose of life was eudaimonia, or eudaimonia, depending on how you pronounce it. And this word was translated in the past as happiness. And so some people said, well, Aristotle thinks that the purpose of life is the pursuit of happiness. But later scholarship, people who looked at what Aristotle was actually saying in the context of his larger works, came to realize that a better translation for eudaimonia would be flourishing. So we can say that Aristotle argued that the purpose of life was to flourish. Now, there's lots of scientific evidence for this, because if you look at any species, any living species at all, we can say that their species goal is to flourish. And as individuals, each individual gets up in the morning and tries to get out there and do well and to flourish. And in doing so, they serve the flourishing of the species of which they are a part. Human beings are no different. We get up in the morning, we go to work, and we try to make sure that we flourish, that our families flourish, that our communities flourish, and ultimately that humanity flourishes. That's the purpose of life. So my argument is that if the purpose of life is to flourish, then what is moral is what serves human flourishing. Morality is really a set of rules that a community agrees upon, because these rules, if followed, will better enable social interaction and will better serve the long-term interests of the community, will better serve the common good, and will better serve the flourishing of the community. You can think of it, there's an analogy with the rules of traffic. Okay, so we go out there, we obey the rules of traffic, we stop at red lights, we go at green lights, and we hope that our fellow citizens will do the same, because we know that if we follow the rules, it serves our interests, we can get to where we're going without having an accident. If they follow the rules, then they're not going to have an accident, they're not going to cause me any harm. And if all of us follow the rules, then the traffic will flow nicely and business will benefit, and individuals will be able to get to where they want to go without having accidents or running into trouble, and all of that serves the common good. And morality is like that. Morality is like traffic rules. It's rules of human interaction that serve the common good. So if you're looking to understand what is moral and what is not, you can just ask yourself, does it serve the common good? Does it serve human flourishing? If it does, it is the moral, ethical thing to do. If it does not, then it is harmful, and it is sinful, and it is wrong, and it is immoral, and it is unethical. Simple as that. So where does science fit in to this picture? Can science tell us what is moral and what is not? Obviously, the religious people only believe that the religious text can tell us what's right and what's wrong. But can science tell us what's right and what's wrong? I believe it can. And the way it can do so is by telling us what serves human flourishing and what does not. And it's already doing this. It does this all the way around the world. There are lots of metrics for determining the level of social progress and the level of human flourishing. These metrics are things like access to healthcare, access to education, healthy birth weight, levels of violent crime, levels of political stability, access to water, access to adequate nutrition. These are things which are measurable and which are subject to improvement if we use scientific methods. And furthermore, those societies which do measure these indicators are societies and who have applied science to trying to improve performance on these indicators are societies in which people report the highest levels of personal well-being. So I want to conclude by saying that the approach that I'm taking to morality, which is to say that morality is that which serves human flourishing, is that which serves the long-term best interests of humanity, is that which serves the common good. I believe this to be a scientific approach because it is a description of what actually is the basis of morality, not necessarily what I think it should be in my own subjective mind, but I really believe that this is actually what is the basis of people's morality. So if you question anyone who has a moral theory, a religious fanatic who is a suicide bomber or an ISIS fighter or a militant Christian or a member of the Republican Party or a Stalinist in North Korea, and if you ask them, why do you think that your approach to morality is the right one? And if you dig deeply enough, they will tell you that we believe it to be the right one because we believe this is in the best long-term interests of humanity. Okay, and of course there's going to be disagreements. One person is going to say, well, I think taxes are evil and it's in the best long-term interests of humanity if we just abolish all taxes. And someone else is going to say, well, no, we should actually raise taxes to a much higher level. Now, how can we sort out the difference between them? Well, you sort it out through argumentation based on scientific evidence. And the question that you want to answer is, what actually does serve the best long-term interests of humanity? Is it this choice or is it that choice? And that's going to help you solve moral problems. Now, of course, if you can't solve them through argumentation, you're going to turn to conflict, you're going to turn to possibly to violence, and you're going to turn possibly to war. That's what human history is like, and that's how human history progresses. But again, my last point, what is moral is that which serves human flourishing, and what is immoral is that which sets it back or hinders it. Thank you. Last point is that we are biological creatures, and we have evolved, we have embedded within us by the process of evolution the imperative, the biological imperative to go forth and flourish, both as individuals and as a species. So how does that translate into real-world activity? Well, we need to align our behavior with that biological imperative. So we need to act always in the best interests of human flourishing. We need, for example, to help our fellow citizens if they need help, but we don't necessarily need to help them to achieve their personal feelings of well-being or to feel good inside. We do want to help them to flourish. We do want to help their families and their communities to flourish. And of course, we want to take care of our own needs. We need to flourish as well. If we don't take care of our own needs, we can't take care of anyone else's needs. And in the real world, if we face any kind of moral decisions, what we need to do is check back and say, what is really in the best interests of the common good? What sorts of behaviors will best serve the long-term interests of humanity? And how can I act to serve human flourishing. And if we've done that, we've found a moral compass that we can use to guide our actions in the real world. So that's all I have to say for today. If you know of any moral theory or any moral approach that does not have as its root the objective of furthering human flourishing, then I really would like to hear about it. So please leave a message, please leave a comment in the message area below, and I'll be happy to respond to it. So that's it for now. I thank you for your time, and hope to see you next video cast. Bye.
Bright sun was shining through my window today when I rise. Time's come to wipe away the slumber from these tired eyes. I said, it's time for rest when the work is done. When night is falling, yes, there's time for fun. But when the sun hits your eyes in the morning, take a good meditation.
You are not just livers, I sing.
When the sun hits your eyes, just